So hey everyone, so if you are interested in buying a used diesel pickup truck, this is a video you need to watch. Not because it's going to be loaded with pictures and graphics and other things like that, but just because I think you'll leave understanding a little bit more about the things that you really need to take into consideration when looking for a used diesel pickup truck. I know it can be extremely difficult, confusing, frustrating trying to figure out if you should buy a Ford, if you should buy a Ram, or a GM truck, whether it's a Chevy or a GMC, for your next diesel pickup truck, especially if you're looking at used trucks. What makes it even more complicated is you really don't know the service records of those trucks. Sure, they can provide you all the maintenance information, when it was in the shop, when it had its oil changes, and that's all really good and relevant. But what you really need to keep in mind is how the vehicle was driven, what it was used for, and if things that aren't necessarily tracked are being done to the vehicle, such as using fresh diesel exhaust fluid or only filling up at high volume gas stations and fuel stations where they cycle through their diesel fuel very frequently, as opposed to just buying the cheapest diesel fuel out there, which could potentially have been sitting in the tanks for so long that it's become contaminated and it could actually damage your system. What I want you to remember is that if you're not the first owner of that vehicle and you don't have all the service records or the history of how that vehicle was driven, what it was used for, you have to keep in mind that to be judgmental over a certain brand that you're driving when it's used is kind of premature and doesn't really make sense. And it's not really fair to the brand, mainly because when you buy a vehicle, let's say it has 30, 40, 50,000 miles on it when you get it, and 10,000 miles into it, you have a problem with that pre-owned vehicle. Oftentimes that problem occurred because of what the person who had it before you did to the vehicle. So keep that in mind when you're buying these trucks, and especially if you're going to be brand loyal when you're shopping for them. If the vehicle you currently have now had, mid to high miles on it when you got it, the whole history of who drove it before you, sometimes you know, sometimes you don't know, but can often be a mystery. And that mystery can really determine how reliable or problematic that vehicle may be now that you own it. Now, the first thing you should never do is just to discount one specific truck brand only because you don't like that brand. Anybody can make a claim that, a Ram with a Cummins engine is the best truck out there. But the fact is, when you look at a truck and you look at the engine in that truck, those are two separate things. The engine oftentimes may have its own set of problems, whereas the truck may have its own set of problems. You can look at Ford from the mid-2000 years where they had the 6-liter Power Stroke engine, and you can make the claim that that was a very unreliable engine. But then you may find one that's been bulletproofed, and in that particular case, it could be one of the most reliable engines. But the truck platform itself is a rock-solid platform. At the same time, you may find a Ram or a GM truck that has a gorgeous interior that's held up very well and hasn't been abused or doesn't have any broken or brittle plastic parts to it. And if you find that combination with a low mileage diesel engine, you may have found the perfect truck for you. So what I'm saying is simply because you heard a brand is more reliable than another one, or you heard that a specific truck is better than another one, does not mean the entire truck is. It could mean that it has a really great engine transmission setup. It might mean that the engine is great, but the transmission's not so great. Or it could mean that the body of the truck itself can hold up very well from a frame, suspension, body cab perspective, as well as interior panels, but the engine and transmission might be more problematic. Now, if you're in a financial position to afford one of the later model diesel trucks, such as a 2011 or newer Ford, Ram, or GM truck, you're generally going to have a pretty solid and a very reliable platform right off the bat. A lot of folks will make the claim that because you have all of the emission systems and the regulations built into these trucks now, especially starting from 2011 and newer, a lot of the issues that you have with these diesel trucks might be related to those parts. And that's very true. You may buy a truck and you may find that the diesel exhaust filter will go out on you, or an EGR sensor might go out on you, or you may just have a failure of some component. And that could happen. But those instances are actually pretty rare. And generally it might be 1 or 2 in every 100 or 200 trucks sold. And of course, because people are more likely to complain about a problem than they are, a flawless performance history of a truck, they're generally pretty vocal about it. And it's understandable. Now, if you're not in the financial position to afford a 2011 or newer pickup truck and you're looking in the 2002 to 2010 range, you do want to keep in mind that there were trucks that were better than others and there were engines that were better than others. Generally, you want to avoid the Ford 6.0 liter Power Stroke diesel. It had some pretty serious concerns, especially when you got over 100,000 miles. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that some of those trucks have been bulletproofed, but most of the bulletproofed version of those trucks are already sold. They already owned to somebody and they're unlikely to be selling those trucks, and they're snatched up pretty quick when they hit the market. So if you find one, you're more likely to find a pretty high mileage 6.0 liter engine that's either been repaired and had problems or hasn't had the mechanical problems yet. And the types of problems you can have with those engines can easily amount to $6,000 to $10,000 in repair. And even if the truck has been repaired, that's no guarantee that the problem couldn't reoccur again. So the only real way to ensure that the truck's going to be more reliable is by having it bulletproofed. And bulletproofing is simply the process of swapping out or using better parts or components than were originally used, which were problematic on that 6.0 liter engine. The 6.0 really suffered from an array of different problems, from inadequate head bolts to the EGR system not working properly to what was called stiction, where essentially oil sticks to the side of the injectors, and the oil and EGR coolers were just inadequate for that specific truck. Now, between 2008 and 2010, Ford switched to the 6.4 liter Power Stroke, which was supposed to be arguably a better engine. However, the main issues that those trucks had were either related to the high-pressure fuel pump failure, EGR issues, DPF issues, and even some other major issues that could cause the engine to really give you problems. And the biggest problem between the 6 liter and the 6.4 liter are that any major repair generally requires for the whole cab of the truck to be removed to work on it. To be completely honest with you, if you're looking to buy a diesel Ford truck to use as a tow vehicle, I would generally recommend that you either go for a 7.3 liter from 2002 and before, or you go with a 6.7 liter Power Stroke from 2011 and newer. Now, I'm not saying that buying one of those trucks is going to guarantee you have no problems, but you will have a far less likelihood of some type of catastrophic failure if you stick to those years, simply because they were known to be a far more reliable engine. Now, the same logic is going to apply towards GM trucks as well. Anything 2011 or newer is really going to be a rock-solid platform, both from an engine, transmission, as well as the body of the truck. Now, when it comes to your 2000 to 2010 Duramax engines, there's definitely some trucks that you want to prefer over others. If you can find a 2006 and newer, or 2006 through 2010 truck, those are the trucks to look for. Your more problematic Duramax trucks were built between 2001 and 2005, mainly because they either had fuel injector issues or they had cooling issues, especially while towing. So 2006 and newer is really the way to go if you're going to get a Chevy or a GMC truck with a Duramax. As far as transmissions go, Allison transmissions have always been a rock-solid transmission platform, so any of those trucks in the recommended year range are going to give you a really good transmission. Though GM trucks tend to be very reliable in that year range, you still want to look out for trucks that have been well taken care of, because oftentimes the things that you would see broken would be a lot of interior things, such as your interior AC vents, maybe the seat control levers, some of your buttons and knobs. Some of those tended to be more brittle in the Chevrolet and the GM trucks built in that era. Another thing to keep in mind about GM trucks is that they run an independent front suspension, and GM did a great job of upgrading that IFS system in 2011 to a whole new, more robust system along with a fully boxed frame. But prior to that, in their heavy-duty trucks, you tended to see more issues with the independent front suspension failing under extreme or even sometimes normal driving conditions. Now for Ram trucks, really you can't go wrong with the Cummins engine. I could talk really about any year range of that engine. The only negative thing you could even say about the Cummins engine is the occasional fuel injector failure, but really that's something that could happen on almost any manufacturer of trucks across any year, especially in the mid-2000s. Typically, injectors would start to show that they're going to fail around 100,000, 150,000 miles, but for the most part, that's something you have to worry about with any modern diesel engine. Between 2000 and 2010, the Cummins engine was a phenomenal platform, and from 2011 even to today, the Cummins engine is still a very phenomenal, reliable platform of engine. Unfortunately, the same can't be said about Ram trucks. Now, from 2011 on to today, even 2009 and 10, Ram did a great job of changing the interior materials they used inside of the truck, as well as some of the components on the outside of the truck. Believe it or not, back in the late 90s and early 2000s, if you removed the bed of a Ram truck, you actually voided the frame warranty because the bed was part of the structure of the frame. So the newer Ram trucks don't have that problem. The frames are far stronger and far more robust and reinforced the way they should have been all the time. Now, that being said, if you find a mid-2000 model, 2006, 2007 model Ram truck with a 5.9 liter Cummins engine, and the truck cab configuration, everything's what you want, and the truck's in really great shape, you're going to have a very high quality truck. Just keep in mind, prior to 2009, Ram really had some interior issues. They had issues with the plastic being brittle on the dash. Plastic parts essentially almost falling apart when you touched them. And that was because the plastic did not react well to UV light. And you just have to be careful because some of the older trucks really show that, especially if you look at trucks that were built in the 2000 era range. So between about 1996 and 2004, you can really see where the plastics and the dashes and the other components were real brittle after they were exposed to the sun for several years. Now, some things that you want to know about all the trucks. Starting around 2007, 2008 is when GM and Ford started introducing a lot of the emission systems requirements in their trucks, basically adding EGRs, DPFs, and other things to limit the amount of emissions released by these trucks. Ram didn't have to follow suit until 2010, 2011, simply because of a credit that they had built up with the EPA. That being said, the number one failure point on your newer diesel trucks from 2011 and newer are going to be problems related to emission systems failure, such as your DPF, your EGRs, your SCRs, things like that are actually designed to reduce or eliminate as much emissions as possible. And that's a problem that can occur on any of these trucks, regardless of the manufacturer. Keep in mind that though there are far more regulations from an emission standpoint on all of the trucks, the power output and the torque of these trucks is really off the chart. Your modern diesel trucks are generally starting at 750 pound-feet of torque and going all the way up to 940 pound-feet of torque. So the reality is you really shouldn't have to worry about modifying a truck nowadays. Some people still do it. They still want to try to get as much power out of the truck as possible. But for most people, you really don't need to try to do much with these modern diesel trucks because they already produce so much power right out of the gate. So that begs the question, should you rather buy a higher mileage newer truck or a lower mileage older truck? And I would suggest that you buy a higher mileage newer truck. I can't give you that answer definitively, though, simply because there's no way of knowing the history of the trucks you're looking at. But I give you that answer mainly because the towing capacities, as well as all the capabilities of your newer truck, are going to far exceed your older trucks, especially from a legality perspective. So if you're looking at hauling a bigger trailer, if you're looking at doing more with your truck, you're going to have more capability with your newer trucks, especially from a legal towing perspective. And you have to remember, it's not just about if you can tow something, it's if you can stop something. And your newer trucks are generally going to have larger braking systems, as well as the introduction of diesel exhaust brakes and the ability to tow and stop larger trailers safely. Unless you're looking at diesel pickup trucks built before 2002, a failure of any major component on any modern diesel truck is going to be costly. Yes, you have the addition of all the emission stuff on your newer trucks, but even with the remote chance that one of those components fails, just the capability and capacities alone, as well as the overall value of the truck, buying a newer truck, I think is going to work out better for you. Now, a lot of concerns about owning some of these vehicles can definitely be voided depending on the circumstances of the owner. If you're extremely mechanically inclined, you know how to turn a wrench, you know how to do major operations on your vehicles, then of course you can do the work to repair these trucks or harden the trucks to make them extremely reliable, regardless of the year, make, or model of the vehicle. So again, this isn't necessarily for those folks. This is more for the recreational tower, the people who are going to be using it for work or to tow trailers, and don't necessarily want to spend all day under the hood trying to do repairs on them. One thing to keep in mind with any of these trucks is that prior to roughly 2007-2008, all manufacturers wax coated their frames. Ford and Ram changed in 2008 and 2009. General Motors still wax coats their frames, but oftentimes a dealer will make the outside of the frame, the part that you can see if you look under the wheel well, look very nice and clean. They may even spray paint it black. What you should do is crawl under the truck and look at the inside of that C-channel rail just to see if any rust is accumulated or if there's any type of damage that you need to be aware of. It's always a good practice to take a look at the frame, get underneath, look to see if there's any unusual bends or awkward spots in the actual frame or body that indicate there could have been body damage or the frame could have been bent. People do some pretty extreme things with diesel pickup trucks, and you do want to really look over the truck to make sure that there's no body damage or frame damage that's ever occurred, either by overloading the truck or being involved in a collision. Now, as a recap, I'm going to give you a quick overview of what I think you should look for if you're in the market for a diesel truck. And again, this is all budget dependent. So depending on how much money you want to spend on a vehicle and how you plan on getting that vehicle, these things can change. Looking at Ford trucks, I would suggest you stick with a 2011 or newer truck with under 75,000 miles. If you're looking at a GM truck, I would suggest you stay with a 2006 or newer with under 75 to 85,000 miles. And if you're looking at a Dodge Ram truck, I would suggest that you look at 2006 or newer trucks, and you also stay under 70 to 80,000 miles. If you stay in that general range, you're going to get a truck that very likely was well taken care of, doesn't have a tremendous number of miles, is still going to retain a lot of its value, and at the same time hasn't reached the mile marker where certain things will start to fail, such as fuel injectors or turbos or other components that you might worry about. That's my suggestion. I know that there's going to be a ton of people that have their own suggestions, but again, this whole video wasn't to overcomplicate things. It was to provide a simple path to help folks who are looking for HD trucks find what they might want as the truck to tow their trailer or fifth wheel. I hope this has been informative. If it has, I'd really appreciate it if you give me a thumbs up and you like and subscribe to my videos. Thank you.